Spiritual practices are like tools. My son loves tools and playing and tinkering with tools, and spiritual practices are practices that are entered in partnership with God, that God uses to work and develop the character of Christ within us. So I would compare spiritual practices to tools. My son has a kind of nifty little toy tool belt, and this tool belt has all these neat little tools. And I would compare spiritual practices to these tools. Now, growing up in different churches that I was a part of, or spiritual practices weren't always emphasized. They were trivialized. Like if I tried to use this plastic hammer to work on a project, it wouldn't work so well. And growing up, there were certain practices that were emphasized more so than others. For example, prayer and fasting and some forms of celebration were encouraged, yet others like solitude and meditation and confession weren't mentioned hardly at all. Now, in my own personal tool belt, I tend to focus on some spiritual disciplines over others. For example, fasting, I put a high value on the tool of a fast. And I've seen the benefit in my own life of emphasizing a fast. It's been something that's been beneficial in my life. But there's others that I don't always gravitate towards. For example, submission. I won't always go towards that one because at times I want my own way. And I like my own way. So a discipline or a tool that's going to work in my life, something that I will chafe against, I'm not always a big fan of. What's interesting in looking at this subject of spiritual formation, spiritual disciplines, is that there's two aspects of it. I focus on what I do or what God is doing in my life and what the tool is able to accomplish. And I look at that side of what a fast will do in my life or externally outside of me. But I'm realizing that this tool, these practices, although there are things that are external and internal, and I see evidences of how God uses them to do things outside of me and how it affects my marriage and my family, but I also begin to see how these tools affect and change my life. So I see in these spiritual practices these tools and how they develop both what I do and who I am. And I think that's the key to these spiritual practices. That if I view them as, hey, what can I accomplish and what can I do externally in the kingdom or in life and in the pursuit of Christ, but I neglect what they do in me and what God wants to produce in my own life and my character transformation, I need to have both together. What God chooses to do through the tool, externally and in my ministry, but also what God wants to develop. And I would probably say they're equally important, what God does within me in my character and what God does in my ministry. So these are the tools, and my goal is that these tools would become less and less trivial and more a part of my life, my ministry, and my journey with Christ.